Hello, welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to read the next chapter of Napoleon Bonaparte. Hopefully this one isn't that long. We're on part 3 now, Bonaparte before Napoleon. I'm going to read these books first. All that I'm waiting for is a chance to take part in a battle, to snatch the laurel crown from the hands of fortune, or to die on the field of glory. Letter from Napoleon to his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, July 1795. There was a prologue in the career of the Emperor unknown Bonaparte, preceding the immense Napoleon. Bonaparte thought was in the will before he appeared on the scene. It set off secret tremors in the earth. It might have been perceptible as soon as Bonaparte arrived. Something formidable, an inexplicable sense of doom. When the globe is threatened by claustrophobic subterranean rumbling gives forth warning. Men are apprehensive, lie awake listening in the night, staring at the sky, not knowing what affrights them, not knowing what it is that is to come. Frances de Chambre, Memories de Dorothée. 1. Okay. Chapter 1. To see Napoleon as Josephine first saw him in Valdemaise, the harvest month of 1795. One must see not Napoleon, but General Bonaparte. One must disassociate the short, slight, shabby, young, itinerant man from the colossus of the future. Efface from one's mind the splendors yet to come, the victories not yet won, battle names not yet carved in stone on the Arc de Triomphe, not yet engaged in bronze or inlay, and marvel around the Porphyry sarcophagus in the tomb on the banks of the Seine, among the French people whom I loved so well. And this one is the words are from Napoleon's last will and testament, in which he asked that his ashes be returned to St. Helena. The request was honored by Louis Philippe, King of the French, in 1840. Above all, one must forget the hush, that the silence under the vast dome of the invading chapels, where thousands from all over the world still throng in daily pilgrimage. For the hush and the awe and the glory are in the Napoleonic legend, and the legend was not yet. As yet no crown of laurels, no trace of imperial purple, no golden insignia of bees and eagles, but only a grim, scrawny, down at heels, young unknown of an official officer who began to pay court to the widow Bonaparte soon after the 13th Vendemiaire, and who was not even considered a particularly eligible suitor in that autumn of 1795. Who is this General Bonaparte? Where has he served? Junot's father had inquired in early 1794 of his son, who had just announced his intention of following that general as aide-de-camp from Toulouse to Paris. Nobody knows anything about him. There was very little Junet could tell, very little to be known about Bonaparte. His chief claim to renown was the role his British artillery strategy had played in dislodging the entrenched British-Spanish fleet from Tonaroo in December 1793, an achievement which had won him a brigadier generalship at the age of 24, except for that there had not been much in the young officer's past to bring him to the attention of the French public. He himself was French by a narrow margin of time, having been born in Ajaccio on the island of Corso on August 15, 1769, exactly 15 months after Corsino had been settled to France by Geneva. The Bonaparte family had immigrated to Corsina from Italy in the mid-16th century. Although fawning toucans were later trying to decorate the Bonaparte genealogical tree with a royal ascendance. Napoleon more realistically described his family as pretty nobility. He was the second eldest of the surviving 8 children born to Latriva and Carlo Bonaparte, a handsome, devoted, spirited, and prolific pair. In triumph to the Bonaparte's remote Greek origins, his mother had named him Napoleonic, pronounced Napoleonic, Napoleon, I don't know how to pronounce that, in the courtesan dialect, after a Greek saint. His father, who was well-to-do in terms of property and produce, but not in cash, engaged in the practice of law. Originally a supporter of the popular Khorasan residents' movement against French demolition, Carlo Bonaparte later transferred his allegiance to the French crown, from which he received substantial benefits for himself, appointment to assist judge in the law court at Ajaccio, confirmation of his title of nobility, and a financial grant for his ever-increasing prodigy royal scholarships. A royal scholarship took 9-year-old Napoleon to France in 1778 to a school in Autumn. That sounds like autumn, but Autun. Autun? I don't know how to pronounce that. For a few months, study of the French language, of which he spoke not a word. And in 1779, to the Royal Military Academy at Brienne in north-central France. There, for the next 5.5 years, he devoted himself to preparation for his military career, specialized in history, geography, and mathematics, although he remembered them fondly in retrospect. These were harsh and cheerless years for a lovely, serious-minded, withdrawn youth. An impoverished provincial among affluent French noblemen's sons, speaking, when he spoke, which was seldom, in a French tinge with a coarse Italian Corsican accent. He was marked as a foreigner among Frenchmen, which he always would be, even as an emperor of the French, even as France's most fabled hero. He was marked with other signs of his alien origin. The Corsican tradition and the way of life differed strikingly from the continental. They were primitive, crude in comparison with the polished, sophisticated, eloquent, ancient rhyme of the 18th century song. He did not need his super, superfluous schoolmates to point out that the Corsican was different. He was himself. He was himself all too conscious of it. His isolation facilitated his single-minded application to study, and his examination grades in 1784 wanted the grant of a second King's Scholarship to École Militaire in Paris, from which he was granted the following year as a sub-lieutenant. Between 1785 and 1787, on garrison duty in various provincial towns, he somehow manages to take on the responsibility of his recent widowed mother and her needy brood, her pride of life. As a recent historian, your 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 fully terms them. But Napoleon, her second son, whose name means the Lion of the Valley, would prove the only lion of the family. The rest would be no more than a pack of jackals, snarling, clawing, disputing among themselves that brothers kill, the territories, crowns, and titles of his conquest. The title of chieftain of the Bonaparte clan, an appropriate designation in terms of the strong Corsican sense of family unity, devoted in theory and by pilgrim primary gesture to Joseph. But it was Napoleon who assumed the role. Having attained to the rank of a captain by 1792, he was in Paris on June 20th, and with his friend Louis Antoinette Vaughan, the Buonaparte witnessed the first attack on the Tuileries. "The fool!" was Napoleon's comment on the king to Buonaparte, who had been his classmate and only friend at Brian, and who was to become his secretary and eventually his biographer. How could he have permitted that ramble to get to the palace? If a few hundred had been mowed down by cannon fire, the rest would be running still. After witness also the second and fatal attack on the monarchy at the Tuileries in August, and the massacres in September, Captain Bonaparte headed back for Corsica to protect his family through the treacherous years. I'm gonna turn that down. Whoa. Oh, okay. Where am I at? What? Protected King's Scholar, King's Cadet, King's Officer, though he had been, he cast his lot with the new republic and fought for it in his native island, where the Khorasan Independence party battle domination by Republican France. It had the royalists. He spent so many months in Cordesia as to seem to hesitate between his home life and France as the scene of his wife's career. In December of 1793 came his first victory on French soil at Toulon, a glowing recommendation from his commanding officer, who reported to the Minister of War in Paris on the virtues of this exceptional officer, his great intelligence and scientific knowledge, and his perhaps overly great personal courage. But for all that lavish praise, the Bonaparte star flickered only fitfully. His army career was not yet assured, his rank not secured. Um, in the confusion of the newly organized war office of the newly proclaimed republic, with its ceaselessly shifting balance of power, generals were being demoted as rapidly and as arbitrarily as they had been promoted, if indeed they were not executed, as in the case of Josephina's first husband. A fate General Bonaparte narrowly escaped. His promotion had come during the radical, terrorist, Robespierre regime, reason enough for his arrest and imprisoned in August of 1794, and Robespierre's overthrow. Bonaparte's coolly shrewd tactics of defense rather than his protestations of innocence accounted for his release from prison, but his position in the military hierarchy was still precarious. The next assignment, as active assignment offered him to the Army of the West, which was under the command of General Hope, was involved in a long and bitter struggle with the royalist guerrillas of the Vendée, was distasteful to General Bonaparte, as civil war is usually distasteful to any career military man. But it was the transfer from his favorite um, artillery into an infantry brigade, which made the assignment unacceptable. His failure to comply with the order came eventually to be construed as insubordination, and only the protection of his newly influenced friend and patron, Boris, saved him from the most serious consequences. But to be without a command and without pay was a serious enough consequence in 1795, and this recalcitrant brigadier flirted seriously with the idea of heading a French military mission to Turkey to assist the Sultan in the reorganization of his army. Turkey was the jumping-off place for the East, and like his hero Alexander the Great, General Bonaparte already thought of Egypt as the key to world conquest. But the mission to Istanbul did not materialize, and Napoleon sat waiting, or more probably pacing the floor in his dingy Paris hotel room in 1795, pacing and waiting for the next assignment, the next opportunity, which was still far off as Vanderground, until that month of October in 1795. Only an occasional administrative assignment in the military operations department of the Committee of Public Safety kept him from starving. That an occasional dinner offered him by Buonaparte or his devoted aide de camp Juna. Whenever these two were in France, fortunately there were also the Pullman friends from Ajaccio, whose daughter Lori would marry Junet. With triple coruscant loyalty, the Pullmans had issued Napoleon a standing invitation to their table. He was too proud to presume too often on their hospitality. However, but he was well accustomed to short rations and knew how to forget hunger pains and concentration on his books and maps. It was a map of Italy as he was studying in 1785, the terrain, the mountain passes, the rivers and the plains, as well as the seasons and the weather. The nature of the political composure of the Italian state, the character of its people. He was convinced that the defeat of the Austrian enemy must come through Italy, by the French army of Italy joining up in a pincer movement with the French army of the Rhine. The plan he prepared for the strategy of the Italian campaign attracted some interest, then gathered dust in the flies of the War Office. The office was on the verge of cashiering General Bonaparte, and a note of despair sounded in his letter to his brother Joseph in July of 1795. Life holds very little meaning to me, he wrote, and if I continue in this state of mind, yeah, that's what this song is. Yeah. And I can also sing that too. Okay. If I continue in this state of mind, I may very well end up too indifferent to sidestep the carriages passing me in the street. But the invisible will, that compulsive ambition, that elemental energy, could only be temporarily affected by moods of depression. All that I am waiting for is a chance to take part in a battle, to snatch the laurel crown from the hands of fortune, or to die on the field of glory. While General Bonaparte waited and brooded in 1795, he contemplated and analyzed the spectacle of France in the final phases of the Revolution, reflecting on the vitality and resilience of the French national character. The memory of the terror is no more than a nightmare, he observed to Joseph the same summer. Everyone seems determined to indemnify him for what he has suffered, determined too in the uncertainty of the future not to miss a single delight of the present. This great people is giving itself up to pleasure, luxury, and the arts have regained their sway. An astonishing fashion, dances, theater, and the women, who are the most beautiful in the world, have become the great business of life. One of these women, a witty young woman, in the words of Denzar, met General Bonaparte at this period of his life and gave the novelist a vivid description of her impression. General Bonaparte was certainly the skinniest and most singular creature I have ever seen in my life. Denzil quotes her as saying, in accordance with the fashions of the day, his hair hung down in dog ears, so long as to brush his shoulders. That massive hair looked especially strange in contrast to his extraordinary eyes, which often took on typical Italian soberness. It's if one's first impression was that here was a fiery man, a man of spirit, one found oneself thinking next that here was a man whom one could not care to come across in a lonely wood at night. General Bonaparte's attire was less than reassuring. His red Reginald was so threadbare, there was such an air of shabbiness about him, that I could hardly believe he was a general. What I could really readily believe was that he had a powerful, at least an exceptional intellect. The third or fourth time I saw the general with the peculiar name, I could forgive him. What? Is that game real? Yeah. It's long. Yeah. Long. That game is real? Yeah, it is. So when can I play that game? I can put it on your wish list. Then do it. Okay. Overlong, dog ears. He might be a provisional, I told myself, with a ridiculously exaggerated hairdress. But undeniably he had his merit. Young Bonaparte had magnificent eyes that lighted up when he talked. If he had not been so painfully thin, so emaciated, as to give the impression of being ill health, one might have noticed his fine features. The contour of his mouth was especially comely. A student of David, a painter who frequented the saloon, a monster, and when I met the general, described his features as Gretchen, which was enough to make me admire the strange man. The fact is all that the fact is that all he needed to be considered handsome was to have been less miserably attired. I still remember that when he talked about the siege of Honolulu, he held our interest on such occasions. He talked at length, and his face became very animated, but on other days he maintained a gloomy silence. People said he was very poor and as proud as a Scot. He had turned down the command in the Vendee because he would not give up the artillery. That's my weapon, he often said, at which we young women went into the gales of laughter, unable to understand how anyone could refer to a canyon in the same terms as to a sword. You would never have guessed him to be a military man. There was nothing dashing about him, no swagger, no bluster, nothing rough. Today it occurs to me that one might have read in the delicate outline of his mouth the fact that he was a man who scorned danger, that he was a man whom danger would never dismay. To this provisional, as Stanhall's unidentified female friend described him, his first close-up view of uh, Parisiennes was dazzling. As he described them in another letter to his brother, women are to be seen everywhere, in the theaters, in the parks, in the libraries. Even in this savant study, you will find the loveliest creatures. A woman needs to come to Paris for 6 months to learn what is due her, and to understand her own power. here only, of all places in the world. They deserve to wield such influence. So of course the men are mad about them. Think of nothing else. Live only by and for them. And the writer, as the letter implies, could only observe from a distance, could not afford or aspire to the flavors of these loveliest creatures. For these, an obscure officer in a powdered, burnt coat would have to wait, as he was waiting for the laurel crown in his tomb. The chance came suddenly in the middle of the night of October 3-4, in a in a su- in a summons from Boroughs, the chance to undertake the defense of the Convention against 20,000 armed in, insurrectionists converging on its meeting place, the Trident. He had precisely 3 minutes in which to decide whether a defense was possible with the 4,000 government troops available to his command, whether the convention was worth defying in all its ineptitude and corruption, its tolerance of a scandalous black market in bread, and of a shameless speculation in currency, its total inability to cope with national disorder. But the only alternative carried the threat of civil war with, on one side, the radical revolutionary factions demanding a return to terror, and on the other, the counter-revolutionary factions, including the disgruntled bourgeoisie, demanding a return to monarchy. The October insurrection was royalist engineered and financed. General Bonaparte, a professional Republican, rushed in 40 cannon and resolved the emergency with a now famous whip of grape shot. His own description and justification of his defense texts against an attacking force with a 5-to-1 numerical su- su- superiority. 201 of the uh, vanguard fell in the approaches of the Tuileries, but the riot was quelled, and the way was paved for the formation, 3 weeks later, of the Directory with bars at its head. The director's reward to General Vandermeer was to give the holder of that unofficial popular title an official one, Commander of the Army of the Interior, the most powerful post in the military hierarchy. The commander's indirect reward was a meeting with one of those loveliest creatures, and he had until now glimpsed only from afar how the Sisyphus Bonaparte Bohartness came to call at his headquarters is part of the sword story, a charming, pretty, and romantic one, and in all probability true, although it is still a point of con- con- controversy among historians. Bars denies the tale as fanciful as embroidery on the legend. But his memoirs were written in exile and is in anger against the Bonapartes. Furthermore, Barr's first version of how they met is contradicted by a second, to the discredit of both versions. On the other hand, the accounts of Napoleon and of Eugene the Buonaparte, the two persons directly involved in the episode, substantially agree, so there seems no reason not to accept their telling of it. That it stemmed from the confiscation of all arms in private hands in troublous sections of the capital, the order for which was issued by General Bonaparte on the 18th, then Midair, October 10th, 5 days after the coup d'elect. As Napoleon dictated the story in the third person to the Count de la Cases at St. Helena, into his headquarters was ushered a boy of 10 or 12. That was Eugene was 14 in 1795, who said that he had come to entreat the commanding general to return the sword of his father, a former general of the Republic. This young child was Eugene de Bonaparte, the future Viscount of Italy. Napoleon, responsive to the appeal of youth and sensitive to the nature of the request, granted it. Eugene burst into tears at sight of his father's sword. The general was touched, and manifested him such good favor that Madame de Bonaparte felt herself obliged to come the following day. To express her thanks in person, Napoleon lost no time in returning to visit. There is one slight discrepancy between Napoleon's story and the version given by Eugene in Horace St. Her children's memoirs claim that it was not Josephina but Napoleon who took the initiative. Napoleon who expressed a desire to meet the mother responsible for inspiring such a noble sentiment in her son, paid the first call at the lady's house. But whether the meeting took place at his headquarters or in her salon, Napoleon himself admitted to La Cases that he had been struck by her extraordinary grace and her irresistibly sweet manner, and that he had lost no time in pursuing an acquaintance which was shortly to ripen into intimacy. All right, and that is the next chapter in Napoleon and Josephina, the biography of a marriage by Frances Mossiker. And yeah. And if you enjoyed the video, give a thumbs up, subscribe down below, comment down below, and stuff. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. And yeah, and that is it. I'll see you in another video. Bye.